My small car, a modest, sensible sedan, felt like a sardine packed into a tuna can each morning. That's because it was. My designated parking spot in the underground garage of the Hawthorne Lofts, here in Portside Borough, was already what I'd call cozy. Tucked between a concrete support pillar on one side and the adjacent spot on the other, it left just enough room for a compact vehicle like mine. Or at least it used to. Then he moved in. I never caught his name. Just his car, a hulking dark gray SUV that looked like it belonged on a mountain trail, not squished into a city parking garage. He was the new occupant of the spot right next to mine, the one that had previously housed a dainty little hatchback. The previous owner, a lovely elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, had always parked perfectly, leaving plenty of room for both our doors to open without fear of dings. She understood the unspoken code of shared spaces. This new guy, he didn't just break the code, he shredded it into confetti and threw it in my face every single day. His SUV was only slightly bigger than my sedan, true, but that slight difference became a colossal barrier when he consistently parked it with a casual disregard that bordered on active malice. He'd hug the dividing lines separating our spots, creeping so far into my precious few inches of maneuvering room that my driver's side door would barely crack open. I'd have to contort myself into shapes I didn't know I could make just to squeeze out of my car, often brushing against the gear stick or scraping my hip against the steering wheel. Sometimes, after a long day at work, I'd just sit there, staring at the mere sliver of space, and feel a deep, burning resentment coil in my gut. It wasn't just an annoyance. It was an imposition, a daily reminder that someone else's convenience mattered more than my basic comfort. And it wasn't just me. My mother, Eleanor, came to visit twice a week. She's in her late 50s, still spry, but her knees aren't what they used to be. Watching her struggle to climb out of the passenger side, or, even worse, try to slide into the driver's seat if I'd parked her car there, was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Each grunt of effort, each wince of pain on her face, felt like a personal insult from the unseen neighbor. "Beatrice, darling, I don't understand why he parks like that," she'd sigh, rubbing her knee. "There's a whole column on his side, isn't there? He has plenty of space there." She was right. I'd seen it. On the far side of his parking space, a good 2 feet away from his passenger door, stood another concrete pillar. He had ample room to shift his vehicle over, to grant me the grace of an extra foot. But he never did. It was deliberate. It had to be. 4 weeks I stewed. I considered leaving a note, a polite request. But something held me back. I was a firm believer in direct, respectful communication. However, I'd learned from experience that some people, like this phantom neighbor, don't respond to politeness. They exploit it. My mother, bless her traditional heart, decided to try the polite route herself one Saturday morning when she spotted him. Or rather, she spotted him in the flesh for the first time. I was upstairs in my loft, getting ready to head out for brunch with her, when I heard her voice a little strained from the garage. I paused, listening. A moment later, I heard a man's low, dismissive mumble. My mother's voice rose slightly. "Sir, I'm just asking if you could please consider." And then, a curt, sharp retort I couldn't quite make out, followed by the slam of a car door. When she came upstairs, her face was flushed, a tight line across her lips. "What happened, Mom?" I asked, my heart sinking. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "I saw him, Beatrice. He was just getting out of his car." I tried to be reasonable. I said, "Excuse me, I'm Eleanor, Beatrice's mother. We live right next to you. My daughter and I have a terrible time getting in and out of our car because of how close you park. Would you mind shifting over just a little? There's plenty of room on your other side." She paused, shaking her head. "And what did he say?" I prompted, already dreading the answer. "He barely looked at me, Beatrice," she said, her voice laced with indignation. "He just grunted, 'I park where I want to park, lady. It's my spot. It's within the lines.' And then he slammed his car door and walked off. He didn't even wait for me to finish. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. He parks where he wants to park. The sheer arrogance of it. The complete lack of empathy. My mother, who had always taught me to be kind, to see the good in people, had been treated like dirt. That was it. The line was not just crossed. It was obliterated. This wasn't just about a parking space anymore. It was about disrespect, about a fundamental disregard for other people's well-being and basic human decency. It was about my mother being dismissed. I had always been a problem solver, a strategist. My work as a project manager demanded it. And suddenly, this parking situation became my most urgent, personal project. I needed to tackle this, not just for my own comfort, but for my mother's dignity, and frankly, for the principle of the thing. No one should have to feel so utterly powerless and put upon in their own home. My first thought was to find out who he was. I dug through the building's online resident directory. Nothing. Only unit numbers and names. No parking spot assignments. The Hawthorne Lofts were a bit of a labyrinth of privately owned units and separately owned parking spots. This meant there was no overarching parking manager, no building authority I could appeal to for intervention. Each spot was its own little kingdom. His kingdom, apparently, extended into mine. I considered the legal angle. I called a friend who was a lawyer, explaining the situation. "He's technically within his lines, Beatrice," she explained sympathetically. "Unless he's causing actual property damage to your car by touching it or blocking your access completely, there's not much you can do legally about how close he parks within his own boundaries. It's a civil dispute over neighborly conduct, really. A civil dispute." A shrug from the law. This confirmed the Reddit posts at it. The system, in its detached impartiality, protected the inconsiderate. It left the burden of resolution squarely on the shoulders of the offended party, but without any real tools to enforce it. My initial anger began to morph into something more calculating, more determined. Every morning, as I struggled to exit my car, I studied his SUV. It was immaculate polished. Clearly, he took pride in it. That was a weakness. I also noted the single security camera mounted high on the wall, angled to cover both our parking spots. It was a standard feature of the garage, there for everyone's safety. But now, it was a silent, unblinking witness, complicating any direct action. Whatever I did, it had to be discreet. It had to be deniable. I wasn't looking for petty vandalism. That was beneath me, and it wouldn't solve the core problem. A scratched fender would only invite more conflict, not resolution. And honestly, it wouldn't feel empowering. I wanted a solution that would force him to change his behavior, not just briefly inconvenience him. I wanted something that made him understand, without me saying a single word, the profound impact of his inconsiderate choices. Something that would make him think twice, not just about my space, but about how he interacted with the world around him. The challenge was exhilarating in a twisted sort of way. I was a woman backed into a literal corner, and I refused to stay there. This wasn't about revenge in the sense of an eye for an eye. It was about reclaiming my peace, my space, and my dignity. It was about demonstrating that even in a system that offered no recourse, individuals could find a way to stand up for themselves, not just with anger, but with ingenuity. I started observing his schedule. He left for work early, typically before 7 a.m., and returned late, often after 9 p.m. Weekends. His car sat largely untouched, a monument to his disregard. This limited my window of opportunity, but also gave me long stretches of time when his vehicle was static, a stationary target for my strategizing. My mind raced through possibilities. Small, legal annoyances? Filling his tire valve caps with glue? No. Too obvious. Too easily traced. And again, too petty. This needed to be elegant, subtle, and effective. It needed to be a solution that didn't just annoy him, but also created a positive change for me and, by extension, anyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation with an inconsiderate neighbor. The core problem wasn't just him. It was the lack of available, accessible solutions for situations like this. So, my solution needed to reflect that. It couldn't be a one-off act of anger. It had to be something that built towards a larger message, a lasting shift. I began to research clever ways to subtly modify a car's environment without touching the car itself. I looked into urban planning, community guidelines, and even behavioral psychology. If I couldn't change him directly, maybe I could change his perception of his space, or at least, make my space feel less like a prison. This wasn't just about winning a parking war. It was about creating a precedent. It was about proving that quiet dignity and strategic action could dismantle even the most entrenched, arrogant disregard. I knew what I needed to do. I just needed to figure out the how. And I was going to do it so subtly, so cleverly, that he would never even know what hit him. He would just find himself one day parking differently. For good. The quiet hum of the Hawthorne Loft's underground parking garage used to be a dull drone of annoyance. Now, it was the soundtrack to my meticulous planning. After my mother's humiliating encounter with the self-important man in parking space 17, the space right beside mine, I knew polite requests were pointless. The online community had offered a spectrum of suggestions, from the utterly destructive to the outright foolish. I'd filtered them all, looking for something precise, something that didn't leave a trace, something that spoke volumes without a single word. My goal was not to damage his car or wage an open war, but to make his self-imposed inconvenience rebound squarely onto him. I began with observation. It wasn't about stalking him, but about understanding his rhythm. The security camera, perched high on a concrete pillar, covered most of our shared section, but it had blind spots, tiny pockets of shadow where light or a particular angle obscured detail. I noted how often he moved his oversized vehicle, rarely, just as the Reddit post had stated, and when he did, I watched his routine. He always seemed to be in a hurry, always focused on his phone, always squeezing himself out of his driver's side, seemingly oblivious to the mere sliver of space he left me. He parked so consistently close to my side that it was like he was trying to merge our vehicles into one monstrous, two-headed car. It was a deliberate, arrogant act of territorialism. My own parking space, narrow to begin with, became a daily exercise in contortion. I'd carefully maneuver my car, angling it just so, then squeeze my body out, often brushing against the gear stick or dashboard. My poor mother, with her aging knees and a less flexible frame, found it almost impossible. She had to use the passenger side, awkwardly climbing over the center console, or wait for me to back the car out fully before she could exit. This wasn't just about my comfort. It was about her dignity, about the quiet violation of our right to simply exist in our own space. This wasn't petty annoyance. It was a deeply disrespectful act that chipped away at our peace of mind in our own home. My initial actions were subtle, almost imperceptible. I started by using the space he left me to my advantage, not to inconvenience him, but to highlight his egregious parking. I'd leave a stray shopping cart from the building's lobby just a bit too close to his driver's side, angled in such a way that he'd have to slightly adjust his door swing. It wasn't blocking him, but it made him hesitate. He'd push it aside with a grunt, never looking up, never suspecting. The camera would only see me pushing a cart, then me parking. Nothing incriminating. Then came the misplaced items. These were objects that naturally belonged in a communal garage, but which I would subtly position in that tiny gap between his driver's door and the concrete column. Sometimes it was an empty cardboard box from a delivery, accidentally tipped over. Other times, a small, lightweight broom or dustpan, seemingly forgotten. These were not obstacles designed to damage, but to annoy. Each time he opened his door, he'd have to nudge it, push it, or step over it. It was like the garage itself was subtly rebelling against his disregard. He'd mutter under his breath, glance around, but see nothing out of the ordinary. The camera would only capture a fleeting glimpse of me bending down by my car, perhaps adjusting a tire, completely innocent. The true escalation began with the phantom scrape. My car, while smaller, was still a vehicle, and its proximity to his was a constant reminder of his inconsiderate parking. I started using a special, clear, non-toxic, and easily removable residue on the very edge of my car, the part that was closest to his. It wouldn't harm his paint, but if he parked within an inch of my car, his vehicle would pick up a barely perceptible mark, a faint, almost invisible smudge that looked like dust or a minor rub. It wasn't a scratch, not real damage. But to someone who meticulously cared for their large car, it would be a frustrating, recurring mystery. He'd find it, wipe it off, only for it to reappear the next time he parked too close. It was a silent accusation, an invisible line he kept crossing. I watched him from my apartment window, binoculars in hand, as he inspected his car. He'd rub a spot, frown, then rub another. He'd circle the car, eyes narrowed, searching for a culprit. He'd even squat down, trying to see if there was some low-lying obstruction. It was immensely satisfying to witness his confusion and frustration. This was what I wanted, not damage, but discomfort, not confrontation, but disquiet. The critical turning point, the climax of my carefully orchestrated plan, came during a week when his car remained unmoving for 5 consecutive days. He had parked even closer than usual, the wheel of his driver's side almost kissing the solid white line of his parking space, leaving my car barely enough room to breathe. I had been planning for this. I had acquired a few small, durable, yet softly padded obstacles. They weren't heavy, but they were bulky and just the right size to be a nuisance. On the 3rd day of his car's inactivity, I made my move. The garage was empty, save for his behemoth and my unassuming sedan. The camera were watching, but I knew its blind spots. I approached my car from the passenger side, ostensibly gathering some things from the trunk. As I did, I accidentally dropped a large, soft, but densely packed gym bag, one I'd filled with old towels and pillows, right beside his driver's side door, wedged it between the door and the concrete column. It wasn't a blockade, but it was just firm enough that his door, if opened fully, would push against it with a dull thud. It wouldn't cause damage, but it would certainly be startling and irritating. I made sure it looked like it had simply fallen from my arms as I was juggling packages. I then casually walked away, feigning frustration over my dropped items, before returning to collect them. I left the gym bag there, nestled snugly. The next morning, I saw him approach his car. He was on a phone call as usual and fumbling with his keys. He yanked his door open, expecting it to swing freely. Instead, it hit the padded bag with a muffled thump. He stopped mid-sentence, looking bewildered. He pulled the door again, harder this time, and it bumped the bag again. He sighed, annoyed, and reached down, yanking the bag out of the way. He tossed it roughly against the wall before getting in his car, muttering. He drove off. Later that evening, when he returned, he parked in the exact same way. He truly was oblivious. I waited for the garage to empty again. This time, I placed not one, but 2 of my soft padded bags near his driver's side door, making it even more awkward. I added a small, inflatable beach ball that I forgot to deflate after a trip to the beach. It wasn't obstructing, but it was another object he'd have to contend with. The message was implicit. This space is not just for you. The following morning was the breakthrough. I heard him before I saw him. A frustrated groan, followed by a loud, "Are you kidding me?" He was wrestling with the gym bags and the beach ball. I watched from my window as he angrily kicked the beach ball and then threw the gym bags into an empty space across the aisle. But here's what changed. When he backed his car out, he didn't immediately pull forward. He paused. He looked at the white line. He looked at my empty space. He looked at his own car. He then slowly, deliberately, adjusted his parking, backing up an extra foot, leaving a visible, generous gap between his car and my space. It wasn't perfect, but it was a vast improvement. My breath hitched. He had learned. The small, persistent nudges had worked. The immediate conflict was resolved. From that day on, his car never again hugged the lines so tightly that I couldn't open my door. Sometimes he'd slip up a little, but a discreetly misplaced item or a subtly arranged shopping cart in the adjacent space would quickly remind him. It was a silent, ongoing dialogue, a negotiation conducted entirely through spatial awareness and minor inconveniences. My mother could now get in and out of her car with ease, no longer forced to climb or contort. The tension in our shoulders, a constant companion in the parking lot, began to dissipate. But the resolution wasn't just about the parking space. The experience, while born from frustration, had transformed me. It had taught me about the nuanced power of strategic action over explosive reaction. I hadn't resorted to yelling or legal battles that would have gone nowhere, or destructive acts that would have lowered me to his level. Instead, I had used patience, observation, and subtle, deniable influence to achieve my objective. I felt a sense of empowerment, not just from winning against a rude neighbor, but from discovering an inner strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I had found a way to assert my boundaries and reclaim my space without resorting to bitterness or aggression. It was a dignified victory. This newfound understanding didn't stop at our parking spot. I realized that the passive aggression I'd encountered wasn't an isolated incident. The Hawthorne Lofts, like many high-density living spaces, had a quiet undercurrent of such small, daily infringements, neglected common areas, inconsiderate noise, forgotten obligations. My personal journey spurred a broader perspective. I started attending the monthly Residents Association meetings, not with complaints, but with proposals. I volunteered to help revitalize the Neighborly Conduct Committee, a dormant group that existed only on paper. I began by advocating for clearer guidelines on shared spaces, using my experience not as a tale of vengeance, but as an illustration of how small acts of disregard could erode community harmony. I suggested a community pledge for new residents, emphasizing mutual respect and consideration for shared amenities. I spearheaded a campaign to improve communication channels, suggesting a digital forum where residents could discuss issues respectfully rather than letting resentments fester. I proposed a system for residents to report non-emergency concerns anonymously, providing an outlet for minor issues before they escalated into major conflicts. The change wasn't immediate, but it was steady. Other residents, who had quietly suffered their own versions of Parking Space 17, began to speak up. They saw that change was possible, that dignity could be reclaimed, and that a more harmonious living environment wasn't a pipe dream. The once dreaded parking garage became just that, a parking garage, a functional space. The quiet hum was still there, but now it sounded less like annoyance, and more like the gentle thrum of a community slowly, thoughtfully, finding its rhythm. My revenge had blossomed into something far more profound, a commitment to fostering a living space where respect was not just expected, but actively cultivated. It was a daily practice, a quiet rebellion of consideration, and I was proud to be at its forefront.